The following video features photos and video footage of diverse people working in a variety of occupations and environments. Throughout the video, key words and phrases appear on the screen to emphasize main points. Early on in the video, and then again at the end, the logos of the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, Transcend Incorporated, and the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research also appear.
When it comes to recruiting and hiring, employers and job seekers, including job seekers with disabilities, want the same thing: a good fit. No one wants to waste time or energy on searches, applications, interviews, hiring, and onboarding activities that only result in disappointment. That's where the Practical Employer and the ADA Successful Hiring video series comes in. It focuses on the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, and how it applies to recruitment and hiring. It helps employers understand and meet their responsibilities under the ADA and attract an untapped talent pool: people with disabilities. This is the first video in the series, How to Write Good Job Descriptions. We will discuss steps employers can take to create and maintain accurate job descriptions by identifying essential job functions and establishing meaningful qualification standards so that qualified applicants with disabilities are not excluded from jobs they can perform. And America's employers can benefit from their diverse skills, talents, and perspectives. The ADA does not require employers to have written job descriptions, but well-written job descriptions can be very useful for employers, employees, and job applicants. They're key to helping ensure a good fit. But what makes a job description effective? While there is no single correct format for a job description, there are some important pieces of information you should include. First, a brief summary of the position is helpful. This should include the role, responsibilities, and purpose of the job. For example, a job summary for a program manager might say, "The program manager oversees progress toward completion of program goals." A job description should also include the requisite qualifications, skills, and knowledge needed for the job. Such qualification standards might include necessary education, certifications, licenses, and specialized experience. Qualification standards might also include physical and psychological abilities, if they are job-related and consistent with business necessity. Many jobs require specific abilities or skills, such as the ability to work well with others, to work long hours or irregular schedules, or to work under mentally or physically stressful conditions. An electrician, for example, might need to have the ability to work in tight spaces. A retail store manager might need to be able to work evening or weekend hours. A therapist might need the ability to empathize with clients without becoming emotionally involved. A good job description should also identify the essential functions of the position. According to the ADA, individuals with disabilities are qualified for jobs if they can perform essential functions, with or without reasonable accommodations. This means that applicants who cannot perform the essential job functions, even with reasonable accommodations, are not qualified. The ADA doesn't require employers to hire or employ people who are unqualified. That's why figuring out what job duties are essential is so important. Many jobs include what the ADA calls marginal functions, duties that are not essential to the performance of the job. Exchanging marginal functions between workers is a common way of accommodating qualified workers with disabilities who may not be able to perform a marginal function. So what makes a function essential? There are many factors to consider. To begin with, a function is essential if the job exists to perform it. For example, if you are hiring a proofreader, then proofreading is an essential function. Or if you are hiring a bus driver, then driving a bus is an essential function. Not all essential functions are this easy to identify, however. Another reason a function might be essential is that it is highly specialized and requires expertise. Flying a plane requires a lot of expertise, and it is an essential function of being an airline pilot. The number of people who are available to perform a function is another factor to consider. For example, in small offices or departments, it may be essential for workers to perform a variety of duties. It may be essential for a supervisor to also answer the phone in a small office with only a few employees, for instance. The amount of time spent performing a function and the consequences of not performing it can also be important in determining what duties are essential. It may be fairly straightforward to determine these factors for some jobs, but other jobs call for a more carefully balanced approach. For example, some functions take relatively little time to perform, or are rarely performed, but the consequences of not performing them would be grave. A firefighter may rarely have to carry a person out of a burning building, but the consequences of not doing it would be serious. So being able to perform this function is essential to the job. Just to recap, a good job description should include a brief summary, qualification standards, and essential functions. Written job descriptions prepared before recruitment begins, as well as the terms of the collective bargaining agreements where they exist, are important in identifying essential job functions. But employers should also look at the real-world experience of current or recent employees in the same or similar jobs. While written materials and even an employer's judgment can be very important in determining essential functions, ultimately, there must be some basis in what employees actually do. Here is one of our top tips for employers creating or updating job descriptions. Focus on the outcome of the task, not on how the task is performed. If you are hiring a factory worker whose job is to organize inventory, an essential function of the job might be to move boxes around the warehouse. Specifying how the boxes are to be moved, for example, by physically lifting and carrying them, is not necessarily what should be listed as an essential function. There may be a number of ways to move boxes, and reasonable accommodations such as tools and equipment that could be provided to enable workers to do so. Similarly, if you are hiring an employee to staff an information desk, the job description should not necessarily say, the employee interacts with customers while standing behind the desk, because standing is not necessary to provide information and direction to customers. Rather, the job description should focus on the customer interaction. There are times when the distinction between essential functions and qualification standards may seem unclear. An essential function for the electrician might be to install wiring in attics and crawl spaces. To perform this function, the electrician will need to be able to climb ladders and work in tight spaces. For the therapist, an essential function might be to help clients develop new behaviors and ways of thinking. To accomplish this, the therapist needs the ability to empathize. Even though these essential functions and qualifications are logically connected, it is still important to understand the difference between them. Essential functions are usually outcome-oriented, while qualification standards are more likely to encompass the education, knowledge, skills, or abilities that are needed to accomplish the essential functions. Employers should carefully consider the purpose and nature of specific jobs in order to define essential functions, as well as to establish valid qualification standards and performance requirements. Performance or production standards are usually established to measure and track things like work output, quality of work, or compliance with deadlines. As with job descriptions, penalties or rewards related to performance standards should focus on outcomes as opposed to methods. For example, a company has several data entry workers who are responsible for at least 30 entries an hour. Workers who achieve an average of 40 or more entries an hour over a month's time will get a small bonus. One data entry worker is blind and uses screen reading software, which the employer has installed on his computer as a reasonable accommodation. The worker should be held to the same standards as everyone else, and if he achieves the 40 entry average, he should get the bonus. The employer cannot withhold the bonus because he accomplished his work with a reasonable accommodation. Workers with disabilities can be held to the same standards as workers without disabilities, as long as these standards are, in fact, applied consistently. While workers with disabilities may need reasonable accommodations in order to perform essential job functions and meet performance standards, they do not have to be excused from legitimate job requirements. It is important to remember that all these things need to be realistic. You don't want outmoded or impractical job descriptions. If you're sitting in your office trying to write job descriptions for any jobs you are not currently intimately familiar with, you're going to want to get out there and see what workers are doing, how they're doing it, and what conditions are like. This may entail observing or interviewing workers, conducting surveys, or distributing questionnaires. Also pay attention to the physical layout of the work site, any equipment used to do the job, and conditions of the work environment. Remember the electrician we talked about earlier? We noted that an electrician might need to work in tight spaces, but one electrician might work in building maintenance on a large college campus, while another works on construction sites, building new facilities. Both may need to work in tight spaces, but the conditions on a construction site may be very different with more exposure to outdoor weather, seasonal fluctuations in temperature, and so forth. Similarly, take note of less tangible factors, such as the need to work as part of a team, or to work independently, or to meet strict deadlines. Finally, review existing job descriptions on a regular basis to make sure they remain accurate and up to date. Ultimately, better job descriptions lead to better hiring outcomes, benefiting employers and workers alike. They're a key component of successful hiring. If you have questions about the ADA, please contact the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. You can reach us or your regional ADA center by calling 1-800-949-4232.